Chapter 7. Even before he opened his eyes next morning, Ken knew that something was wrong, and he pushed away the moment of complete awakening. He lay facing the window and saw that the pines on the hill were quiet. No wind today. Then he remembered he had stampeded the mares. He had a feeling that it was late. For some time he had been half hearing all the early morning noises. Gus opening the kitchen door, the only recent steps across the kitchen floor, and the shaking down of the ashes and the making of the fire didn't wake everyone was because they were so used to it. There had been steps going down too, and his mother's voice saying, "Time to get up, boys." He slipped out of bed and went to the window, hitching up his pajamas. Howard was on the terrace right underneath, and Ken could see the top of his head, black and smooth, with the part exactly in the center. He had on blue jeans and a clean chambray shirt and a red bandana. Howard looked up. "Hi." Ken stared at him without answering. Howard's black eyebrows and his thin mouth were straight lines across his face. He was smiling a little, but his eyes were watching craftily. "Mad at me, ain't you?" "Tattletale." "I didn't tell on you." "You're a liar." "All I did was ask if cigarette tossed you and if you found the blanket." "You started it. You knew I'd get it in the neck." "That's not lying." "You're always getting me in trouble. You want to." "Say, let's make up, Ken. We could go down to the swimming pool. It's going to be hot." Ken glowered. "We could start on the colts." "What colts?" "Our summer colts. Dad left 4 of them in the calf pasture yesterday. We got a halter break them like we did last year. I get first choice," he said. "Do you choose one and then I choose one and then you and then I? Or do you choose both yours first?" "Well, he said I could choose both first." "I bet you're lying." "Tell you what, Ken, if you'll make up, I'll choose just one and let you choose next." Their father's voice came loudly. "Didn't I tell you to watch that sprinkler, Howard?" Howard hastily changed the sprinkler. McLaughlin was coming from the tool house. He had let out the dogs, and they were jumping around in frantic with joy, as if they were afraid every night there would never be another letting out or another morning. McLaughlin had a shovel in his hand and went about the green, cleaning it of the manure the horses had left and shouting to Howard about taking an interest in the grass that had been so hard to start and still had to keep green. The red Rhode Island hen that had stolen a nest followed him, clucking and picking at the manure spots, and the hatch of cheeping yellow chicks swarmed around her, tiny feet twinkling at her call and wing fluffs beating the air. Ken faded back into the room and hastily began to dress. The smell of coffee filled the house. Howard watched his sprinkler, moving it little by little down the terrace, and planned his day. Ken would be all right now, he thought. He was never hard to manage. They might have fun in the swimming pool or go shooting. "Breakfast!" sang out Nell's voice. She ran out onto the terrace. She had on a green dress with a zipper all the way down the front and a sash across the back. She clapped her hands and yelled for them to come, and Rob dropped his shovel and ran at her, and Ken stopped tying his necktie to watch. His mouth was open, and there was a smile on his face, because it was always fun when his father and mother started playing. She dodged and ran around the fountain, and her husband chased her and reached out a hand and caught her sash and undid it, and she screamed and ran for the steps, and both dogs ran in between them, barking, and almost tripped him up. They'd gone in. Ken hurried to finish, but he hated to go down. He felt so out of things. On the way downstairs, he stopped before the picture of the duck. It was a big black duck with white breast and legs and white bars on its wings. He was fierce and handsome standing on his rock, just about to launch himself into the waves of the gray, choppy lake. There was such a reaching in his eager beak and one lifted foot and the forward tilt of his body, Ken felt as if it dragged him in too. In another second, he would feel the icy sting and shock of the water, the bitter cold, sharp, unpricked waves, and the grayness of the misty air hanging over it, full of fear and loneliness. His skin went gooseflesh. At the breakfast table, his father was waiting to hear Ken clatter the rest of the way downstairs. "I bet he's looking at the duck," said Howard. "What duck?" "On the landing. He looks at it for hours sometimes." "Howard," reproved Nell, "he never looks at it for an hour." "Well, a long time seems like an hour." "In God's name," McLaughlin's voice was ringing, "what duck on the landing?" My Audubon print, explained Nell quickly. The one that hangs under the clock. Ken likes to look at it. Ken, roared his father, and hastily Ken's sturdy shoes clattered the rest of the way down the stairs, and he came into the kitchen, his hair meticulously parted and slicked down and his face sullen. What did you stop on the landing for? Ken opened his napkin and looked down embarrassed. I was looking at the duck. The duck? Out the window? The duck in the picture there. There was a little amused glint in Nell's eyes as she helped Ken to oatmeal. Didn't you know we were at breakfast? Things were moving very fast for Ken. Horses crowded him. I think I skipped a page, guys. Because that doesn't make sense with what I was just reading. Yeah, I did skip a page. I didn't think, finished his father for him. Ken didn't look up or make any reply. He had known it would be like this. He poured cream on his oatmeal and reached for his brown sugar. Ken, said his father, I'm going to take back an order I gave you yesterday. I'm going to remit your hour of study. Ken looked at his father in astonishment, his mouth opening in relief and pleasure. I got other plans for you this summer, McLaughlin continued pompously, and Nell tucked her face down to hide her smile. How often had she heard Rob order a balky horse to whoa, or seen him spur and lash a runaway? And, continued Rob lamely, I'm going to give you a colt. Ken shot out of his chair. Spoon and dishes were clattering. A spring colt, Dad, or a yearling? McLaughlin was taken aback, but Nell dropped her eyes again. If Ken got a yearling colt, he'd be even up with Howard. A yearling colt. Oh, a yearling colt. Your father means, Kenny, she said smoothly. Sit down and eat your breakfast. Look what you've done to your porridge. Ken gathered up the china and silver he had scattered, replaced them, and sat down again. Color had rushed to his face. I'll give it to you a week from today, said his father. Between now and then you can look them over and make your choice. I can have any yearling colt on the ranch that I want? Asked Ken. His father nodded calmly, pushed his chair back, and took out his pipe. Speechless, Ken turned to look at Howard, and the two boys eyed each other up. Even up at last. Does it have to be a yearling colt, Dad? Asked Howard. Could it be a spring colt if he'd rather have a spring colt? It could be anything foaled on the ranch since a year ago, said McLaughlin. There are 18 yearlings. So far, 13 or 14 new colts, a few yet to come. Will you take a yearling or a spring colt, Ken? Asked Howard. In answer, Ken turned upon Howard in an exaggerated, pitying sneer copied from the movies and mastered only after much practice. But his father asked the same thing. Yearling or spring colt, Ken? Ken answered, a yearling. Horse or filly? This stopped him. His eyes lost focus as mental images crowded. Rocket was a mare, but there was Banner and the albino Mustang Hero. There emerged from the confusion a definite sense of the superiority of the male. I'll take a horse colt. His voice was final and authoritative. An imperceptible glance passed between Nell and her husband. McLaughlin laughed and said, that narrows it down. Let's see. How many horse colts were foaled last year? 10 fillies and 8 horse colts, said Howard. You got 8 horse colts to choose from, Ken. Things were moving very fast for Ken. Horses crowded him. Which were they? Said Nell. I've got them all down in the stud book. I left it up at the stables the other day in the tack room. Ken, run up and get it, and we'll look over the list. I'll go too, said Howard, sliding out of his chair, and both boys rushed out the door. Ken tore ahead. A colt, his own. His mind was full of images. A little foal just born, almost knocked down by his mother's tongue licking it. Banner rearing, his great forefeet beating the air, his big light belly, his fierce face and arching neck. A little yearling running, a black, a chestnut. His colt was all of them. He dropped his head back and yelled. He pranced and galloped. Howard caught up with him and said, You crazy. My colt, sang Ken. He ran in a circle, pacing, racking. He stuck his elbows out and said, Whoa there, hi. He tossed his head and shook his mane. You goofy, exclaimed Howard, watching him. Ken rushed at him with fists up. Howard fell into position and they sparred. Ken didn't care what happened to him. His arms went like flails. Howard blocked his blows easily. Ken broke out of it and went flying up to the stable. He had a sharp consciousness of change and new importance. Things had begun at last. Things could be real now. They found the stud book and ran back with it. As Nell read out the list of yearlings and the names of their dams, Ken began to feel queer. These were definite flesh and blood animals, named, described, tagged, in a book. Not the colts that had kicked their heels and played and tossed their manes in his dreams. He felt the sense of loss, which every dreamer feels when the dream moves up, comes close, and at last is concrete. I haven't named them all, Nell was saying. There were some I never saw. They had run off somewhere when I went up on 20 to look them over and put them in the book. The bronc bunch, grunted McLaughlin, referring to the progeny of the albino. They're always missing when they're wanted. Ken and I trained 4 of the yearlings ourselves, said Howard. Every summer the 2 boys had the job of handling and halter breaking 4 of the spring colts. The colts the boys trained last summer were Doughboy and College Boy and Lassie and Firefly, said Nell, studying the book. 2 horse colts and 2 fillies. Say, Ken, said Howard eagerly, why don't you take Doughboy? He was one of yours, and when he grows up he'll be sort of twins with mine, in his name anyway. Doughboy, Highboy, see? But Ken looked scornful. Doughboy would never have half Highboy's speed. Last summer McLaughlin looked over the colts and said, he's a chunk. We'll name him Doughboy. He might turn out a heavy hunter. Look at the big legs on him. Lassie, then, suggested Howard again. If you want speed, she's fast as anything, and she's black as ink like Highboy. I said I was going to take a horse, said Ken. Besides, Dad said Lassie will never go over 15 hands. Remember one thing, Ken, said McLaughlin. You can't tell much about a colt when it's a newborn, and not always much more when it's a yearling. Blood's the thing. The prepotency of blood. They had heard this term often, for whenever McLaughlin got talking about horses, he used it. That's the trouble with this stuff I've got from the albino. He had a prepotency. That devil passed on his traits. They don't wear out. Must have had some magnificent blood strain somewhere in his ancestry. Arab, probably. Put enough Arab blood into a line and it gives prepotency to the traits you don't want as well as those you do. Lots of Arab blood in these western Mustangs. Comes from the Arab and Barb horses the Spaniards brought over. McLaughlin got up, went to the shelf beside the spice closet, and took down one of his favorite books on the genealogy of the American horse. He turned the pages, looking for a passage. Howard suddenly jerked his head back, listening. Car coming. They all became motionless and heard the car rattle over the cattle guard at the home pasture fence, come up the low hill behind the house in a second gear, then whiz past. The boys darted to the window at the back of the house and saw the rear of the car as it vanished over the crest of the hill on its way to the stables. A dusty black car, announced Howard, returning. McLaughlin closed his book. Might be Doc, he said. To geld the 2-year-olds? Asked Nell. Yes. Howard, run up to the stables and see if that was Dr. Hicks. As Howard left the room, Ken asked, Can I watch, Dad? Nell caught her husband's eye, and he did not answer. Run up to my room and get me a handkerchief, will you, Ken? Right-hand corner, top bureau drawer. When Ken had gone, Nell said, Rob, don't let them see the gelding. They might as well, said Rob. They have to know sooner or later. They know already, but so far they've never actually seen it. You've always had it done before they got home from school. Won't hurt 'em. Ken returned and handed his mother the handkerchief. Howard arrived almost at the same moment at the back door. It's Doc Hicks, Dad, and his assistant. I thought so. Run and tell Gus to light a fire up there and get some water boiling. He's already up there. He's got the fire lit. He was about to dash away again, but Nell called him back. Sit down and finish your breakfast, she said. You too, Ken. You've hardly eaten a thing. The boys finished hastily. Gus appeared at the door. If we could have an old sheet for clean rags, missus? Nell brought an old sheet, clean and folded, from the linen closet. Ken finished eating, wiped his mouth, and said, Excuse me, please, and darted after Gus as he left the room. Dad's given me a colt, Gus. Any colt on the ranch up to a year old, Howard finished and ran after them. Nell sighed as she rose to clear the table. A bloody day. I hope they get through all right. Rob did not answer. He wasn't looking at her. Suddenly, he laughed. I'll take a horse colt. Did you hear the voice on him? When he said that? He's never talked or looked like that in his life before. He pushed his chair back and got up. Now, if he just picks a good one. He went to the door and hurried out. That's chapter 7.